Welcome everyone to tonight's Tenement Museum Book Talk featuring The World Eats Here. I'm Kat Lloyd, Director of Programs in the Tenement Museum's Education Department. I'm really glad to be here with you virtually tonight, and thank you so much for tuning in. Before we get started, if you are watching this event live, you can ask questions and add comments for our participants throughout the event. And we will have dedicated time at the end for answering your questions, but feel free to ask throughout. We really want to hear from you, hear your questions, and hear your comments. So if you're not familiar with the Tenement Museum, we are a museum that tells the stories of immigrants, migrants, and refugees in the United States. And we are a history museum located in the Lower East Side of New York City. And we often feature stories of food and cooking and immigrant-run small businesses. So we are very excited to be celebrating tonight the launch of a new cookbook, The World Eats Here, Amazing Food and the Inspiring People Who Make It at New York's Queens Night Market. The book is available for pre-sale and will launch officially on May 12th. And we're partnering tonight with Book Review. It's the largest independent bookstore in Long Island for any book purchases. So tonight for our event, we are joined by the book authors, Storm Garner and John Wang, as well as Danny Atehortua, a book contributor and Queens Night Market vendor. So we'll have a conversation with them about the market, how they developed a cookbook from the vendors' recipes, and what's happening in their community right now. The Queens Night Market is located in the Corona neighborhood of Queens, one of the neighborhoods that is hardest impacted by the coronavirus. So we'll really look at what their community is facing and how they are rallying and helping each other during this crisis. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to our participants tonight. First is Danny Atehortua. And Danny, he is the co-owner of Arepaliciousny. He co-owns this business with his wife. It's a Colombian restaurant in Ozone Park, Queens, and he and his wife are vendors at the Queens Night Market. He came to New York from Medellin, Colombia when he was 12 years old, and after graduating school, worked as a deckhand on the ferry to the Statue of Liberty. He and his wife started Arepaliciousny out of their love for cooking as a hobby and grew it into a business in 2013. So, hi, Danny, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Hi, how are you? Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
And next, it is my pleasure to introduce Storm Garner. Storm is a multidisciplined artist, a writer, filmmaker, designer, musician, born in DC, raised partly in Paris, and based in New York City, since working on her first La Mama ETC theater production in 2006. She holds a BA in creative writing from Columbia University, and she's currently a master's student in the oral history program at Columbia University. She created the video for the Queens Night Market's first Kickstarter campaign and adapted the Queens Night Market vendor stories in the World Eat Here cookbook from her long-form interviews with them for her thesis. This year, Storm is conducting a second round of interviews with Queens Night Market vendors to document how they are coping with the current COVID-19 crisis. And Storm, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks so much for having me.
And our final participant to introduce you tonight is John Wang, who's married to Storm. They got married recently. And John grew up in Texas. He went to the University of Michigan and attended law grad school and Yale Law School, pardon me, and business school. He left his job as a corporate attorney in Manhattan in 2013 after paying off his student loans. And then started planning for the Queens Night Market, which ultimately launched in 2015. Since it launched, the Queens Night Market has welcomed over 1 million visitors, helped launch nearly 300 new businesses in New York City, and represented over 90 countries through its vendors and their food. So thank you all for being with me here virtually tonight. And I am really looking forward to our conversation. To start us off, John, could you just tell us a little bit about what the Queens Night Market is and what we would find if we visited?
Sure. I think most people come. Oh, there. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I think most people honestly come to the Queens Night Market for the food. We have, as you mentioned, food from over 90 countries. One of the unique things about the Queens Night Market is the price cap on food. In 2015, the price cap was officially $5 for all food you could buy there. We've introduced some $6 exceptions over the last few years, but that's still the minority. So you'll find 3 or 4 live bands, local live bands and performances. We've had dance troops from Africa, from Bali, from you name it. And you'll find games for kids and lots of space to sprawl out and enjoy. But I think most of all, you'll sort of find a place where people mingle and community gets together from all over New York City. And actually, we have increasingly global tourists come. But you can expect on a busy night, which equates to a good weather night, anywhere from 10 to 20,000 people enjoying themselves, hopefully, and eating lots of food and mingling and doing some shopping, listening to some music.
Yeah, every time I have been, it has always been incredibly crowded, and it's an incredible opportunity to see how many people you have drawn to this market over the years. So for both of you, how did the market come into being? How did the idea come about, and how has it developed over the years it's been open?
Sure. So I quit the law firm in 2013. Did soul searching, all the kind of things you can imagine when you sort of give up a paycheck. And then 2014, I was thinking about leaving New York City, thought if I stayed in New York City, I wanted to do something crazy, needed to be some sort of huge benefit to New York. I don't want to say huge, but at least some sort of positive impact on New York City itself. So that the next day I dreamed up this idea to start New York City's first night market. And it took a year of planning, took a sort of, unfortunately, Kickstarter campaign that did not reach its campaign, which Storm did. Yeah, that was kind of the genesis. But, there are 2 parts to the Queens Night Market we always talk about. One is I guess the mission is to be 2 things. One is the most affordable sort of community event in New York City, but also the most diversely attended and also the most accessible. So they're all sort of interrelated, those missions, and I can talk about it ad nauseum now or later, but that's sort of the really short answer of how it happened.
That's great. And, I really see the inspiration from other night markets. For those who aren't familiar with the concept of a night market, where did you draw that idea from, and what were you looking to for inspiration? Right.
So the sort of technical aspect of starting a night market itself was definitely Taiwan, where I spent a lot of time as a child during the summers when my parents would take me back to stay with my extended family. And as a kid, I sort of fell in love with night markets. And I think historically, don't quote me on this, but thousands of years ago, night markets started because it was just too damn hot to shop outside during the day. And so it made sense that everyone would go out at night when the sun went down and it was cooler. So that sort of the night market part of it definitely came from my childhood love of night markets. But the other aspects, for instance, the affordability definitely came from my travels, especially during that year of soul searching after the law firm, going to developing countries and really realizing these sort of local markets that had amazing, it was such a gateway to the local culture, sort of both socially and culinarily. And also the fact that, we are so privileged in living in the US that sort of the US dollar goes so far in these countries, and, you could eat like royalty for just a few bucks. And I was no longer getting a paycheck in New York City. So I thought, this would be my way to fight back against the escalating cost of living in New York. And then finally, sort of the diversity piece was if it was gonna sort of satisfy this project need that I had of doing something specifically for New York City that represented New York City, the thing that comes out to me, other than the high cost of living in New York City, is the diversity, like the number of people, types of backgrounds, type of socioeconomic status you see on a single subway trip. It's pretty remarkable. So I always tell people it would have been easy to start a night market in sort of any big city for sure, because there's probably, most of them tend to be Asian centered and Asian themed, because maybe that's where a lot of them started. But I could have done that anywhere, and that wouldn't have fulfilled my need to sort of do something that spoke to New York City. And so the idea of like getting as many cultures as possible represented in this event was, came specifically inspired by New York City for sure.
Yeah, certainly. And, I love thinking about that, both the inspiration from other countries in the form of the market itself, in this concept from Taiwan, but then the cultures that all of the vendors are bringing with them, and really the fact that this market is located in the most diverse neighborhood in New York City, along the most diverse train line in New York City. I think really that reflection comes through in the way you've curated the market.
Wow.
So I want to bring Danny back and have him tell us a little bit about how he ended up a vendor at the market. So Danny, what's your story? How did you end up as a vendor at the Queens Night Market?
Well, my wife, she loves to cook. Well, we most of the time we were selling arepas, the cheese arepas, to the family members and friends. So one summer I went to a market in the city. So it came to my idea, I should try to do that. So that same year when I was looking around, I saw John's ad on the newspaper. That they were doing. So I mean, it was, they came on the newspaper, they were going to open, it was going to be very affordable, for someone who's starting, because most of the markets on the city, they're on the roof. So I got in contact with him. Then he told me about all the process that I had to start a business. I had to open a business account with the city. So it worked out good. And that's how I started. I mean, I started, when I was going to start with John, it took me a little longer. So somebody else got the spot for the arepas. So the only way for me to start with John was doing something else.
Oh, so you didn't originally cook arepas there?
That was the plan, but it took me longer for the paperwork to be accepted. So somebody else got in front of me. But in my mind, I was, I had to get on the night market no matter what. As soon as I'm in, then I look and try to find something to sell and start moving up. So I came out with an idea, I sent it to John, he sent me. So the first year, I was selling obleas, with this like some type of Colombian crackers. That went all right. The second year, we changed it to fried plantains. On that time, I was with my brother-in-law. We were doing it together. And then I think the third year, that's when I was able to start with the arepas. And it was a big hit. I mean, well, that time, she was still selling arepas to the friends and family, the receipt. But after the third year, the night market, that's when I was able to start selling the cheese arepas. And since then, we've been selling it all the time. That's our number one receipt right there, number one sale.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear how you changed what you served at the market over the years to determine what is most popular, what do you want to cook, what do your customers want. So I'll ask you a question about that in a few minutes, because I would love to hear more about how you develop your recipes and decide what to cook. But I'm curious to know, Storm, so you made this first video for the Kickstarter campaign for the Queens Night Market, but how did your involvement with the market develop?
I didn't have it. I'm a filmmaker. I was working on a bunch of different film projects and theater projects and music projects and performance art projects, the usual creative New Yorker freelancer life. But when I met John, it was like we became super fast, like really close friends. And part of his appeal was he had this crazy idea for a night market, and it was just so cool. And I grew up in Paris going to international school, and that really made a mark on, my sense of identity. I feel like most at home with people from all around me, hearing different languages. And I just loved the idea, and I wanted to help however I could. And he had this idea to make a Kickstarter video, but his ideas of how to do that were, from my understanding, really wrong. He was all like, yeah, I want people to know about the night market, but I don't want anyone to ever see my face or know my name. And I'm like, dude, that's not gonna work. Like we had a lot of alcohol-infused conversations to get him to be more comfortable telling his own story and approach and being more vulnerable. And because ultimately that's who I am. I love storytelling, and I love people and their unique personalities. And that's why I've always been most interested in the cultural aspect of the Queens Night Market. I mean, I love the food, but what's most magical is just like so many people from all over and so many life experiences right next to you. And then something about the atmosphere that John's created at this amazing event, because it's so casual and kind of, I don't want to say chaotic. It's not chaotic. It's very safe. But you know, it doesn't feel like a formal, like this is where we are learning about each other. It's just like people are just there to have fun and hang out. You end up sitting next to somebody on a picnic bench, and you're talking about the food. Like, oh, did you try the Arepaliciousness arepas? Oh my gosh, they're so good. They remind me of this
They're kind of good.
And then you and then you start up a conversation. You're like, oh, that reminds me of this food that I had in my home country. And it's just an amazing, it's like the best of New York. Yeah. So I've been always interested. And then John and I had a big fight right before the night market first opened. That's why I'm definitely not part of after that. We didn't talk for like 2.5 years. But then I remembered he was my favorite person and called him up. And, you know, had been checking in on the night market. And because I was kind of surprised that there'd been lots of press, but there hadn't been nobody had really captured in writing in a big documentary project what to me makes this place so special. And so I launched an oral history project to interview, first starting with vendors. I interviewed Danny, gave a wonderful interview last year. And yeah, so that's the cookbook that we're talking about now is recipes from the vendors and excerpts from my oral history interviews.
Yeah. And, you know, I just as a visitor to the market, I've always felt that sense of the storytelling and the presence of community and that sort of specialness of the market as something that is so different from anything else that I've been to in New York City. And that absolutely comes through for visitors. And I would love to hear a little bit more about that before we dive into the recipes and the cookbook and how you developed that project. I'm really curious just to know more, really from all three of your perspectives, how has the community of the market developed over the years? It really seems like such a strong element of the whole dynamic. So how have you seen that community develop since the market's been open?
You asking me or the other two?
John, start out, absolutely.
I can only speak about
What's that? You're asking me?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, sure. You know, I think it's one of the amazing things about the Queens Night Market, or I don't know if it's amazing, interesting things to me anyways, is that night to night, the audience is completely different. And it sort of depends on a lot of things. I mean, there's this baseline of visitors that come every single week, and that's not an exaggeration. There are people that have probably been there, whatever, 95 or however many night markets we've had since we started. But there will be influxes of people, and part of it's sort of tricky because it depends on, you know, one thing we're blessed with is just like unbelievable press and pure luck. A lot of it's probably pure luck, and just, you know, people write about it all the time. People love it. And I think reporters sort of dig the mission and the vibe itself, right? I hope anyways. So, you know, almost on a weekly basis, we get someone writing about the night market for some reason or another. And so, like, you know, you can see, you know, people from Brooklyn coming in one night and there'll be like thousands of them, and someone from, like, you know, it might come up in an ethnic newspaper and you'll get, you know, hundreds or thousands of them as well. But I think, you know, just as a matter of fact, the first probably night of a night market in 2015 was probably, I would guess, 80% Asian visitors, because then I think the press that was generated beforehand was a lot of Asian news media, but also the idea of a night market. No one had ever heard, you know, sure, people had heard of it. The majority of people had not heard of what a night market was, and sort of hard to imagine unless you get there. So it was just people who had been to night markets before the first night. And we were so overcrowded that first night. But after that, like, it's just been a discovery process. And, you know, I would just say that it's probably gotten more and more, it's definitely gotten more and more diverse every night, probably on average, and for sure over the years. We always love to tell people when we're looking for sponsorships, which hasn't been great. But I mean, one of the most amazing catch-22s we've heard from our sponsorship searches is that our audience is too diverse to spend budget, like, marketing dollars on, which is pretty crazy, right? So, like, you think about big corporations, they have all these strategies and, you know, siloed funds to do this, that. We want to increase this kind of sponsorship or subscribers and this kind of stuff. And it turns out that we sort of cut across so many lines, like almost in a straight line. We don't have majorities, that corporations have a hard time affiliating with us because we're just so diverse, and they don't know what to do with that, and they don't have sort of a broad general fund to fund these things.
Yeah,
Bad
I mean,
for the bank
that's
account, great for the morale.
well, I mean, it is sort of fascinating in a city that, you know, while New York, of course, is so diverse, you know, you often do find that people, particularly when it comes to restaurants, you know, are going to places that are kind of specific to particular identities or communities. So to find a place that really does cut across these different types of identity, of age, of race, of ethnicity, language spoken, it really is truly remarkable.
Sorry, before you switch over to any of my other two esteemed colleagues, I do want to say one community I do have really have the pleasure to watch from the backgrounds, right? Like on Saturdays, I'm sort of, she'll tell you I'm like a mess and I'm probably having a few beers and like trying to, like, it's a hot mess. But sort of in the Sunday through Friday, the vendor community is pretty amazing, right? I know that from like hearsay that all vendors at other markets are very competitive, and you know, they like, how much did you make, with the sort of side eye. And like our vendors are having dinners with each other, and they're having sort of secret underground, you know, supper clubs, and they help each other, they lend each other equipment, and it's pretty amazing. And I think, you know, I always tell people that I think our vendors are a little bit self-selecting, because I think you have to be if you're willing to take a price cap on your food, because you're basically artificially minimizing or decreasing your profit margins on each sale. But the people, the vendors that are there, including Danny and, you know, the other 500 or 600 vendors we've had since we started, the community, the camaraderie there is pretty amazing. And, you know, it's not something I speak to because I don't get invited to the supper clubs, but that's something that I do love. But
you should also get some credit for that, because John is such a careful curator of the menus so he makes sure that no two vendors are selling something that would be in direct competition with another food item that another vendor might be selling. And so I'm sure that helps a lot.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
And yeah, I mean, I'd be curious to hear, Danny, from your perspective, what do you find in the vendor community? You know, who, you know, do you sort of see yourself reaching out to and forming friendships with? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, what John said is right. It's like everybody's so different and everybody has a different cuisine. So it's easier for us like to communicate and taste and learn, and you get like a friendship. You know, like we get off the phone, we start calling each other, you know, we talk about next week, oh, how you think it's gonna be, it's gonna be busy, it's gonna be slow. So we try to help each other. And when we get like a new member on that day for the summer, we try to help them out. You know, we speak to them because sometimes they go with their eyes closed and they don't know what they're gonna expect. So, because I mean, like he said, like the food is different, and everybody's there, you know, to show what they like. Because most of the people that go there is because they love to cook and they want to show their cuisine to the world. I said because on the night market you get people who hold parts of the world. You know, it's not just Asian or Latino; it's everybody. You meet people from Queens, from Boston, from Florida, that they came to New York and they go to the night market because they saw it on the news, they saw it on Facebook, Instagram. So it's like a small community. You know, that's what I like about the night market. And that's why I think as long as I can stay there, I will stay there, even if I had a restaurant, because it's different. The restaurant, you got your people coming all the time, but at the night market, every weekend, you got your regular customers, because it's people that go there every week, and then you meet new people. And I love it, you know, I mean, since we opened, I had a lot of good friends from the night market.
Yeah, and I mean, it really reminds me, what you're all saying reminds me of, you know, what we talk about at the museum, you know, of the Lower East Side 100 years ago, 120 years ago, when really the street in the Lower East Side was an open air market, and you would have vendors out on the sidewalk selling fresh food, baked goods, and in that market, you know, often there were vendors who were forming friendships, and small businesses helping each other. And we often talk about particularly family-owned immigrant businesses, supporting each other, even if they happen to sell the same kind of product. I really see echoes in what you are saying of this really rich history in New York City of particularly small businesses forming community with each other, helping each other out, and connecting to people from different backgrounds through those businesses. I mean, Danny, you can really hear in the way you describe this, the love of sharing food from your culture with other people. And you run the business with your wife, right? Is that right? With your wife, Shirley. I'd be curious, just before we turn over to talk about the cookbook, what's it like running a business with your wife? What role do you each play in the business?
I mean, it's not easy. We see each other at the restaurant, at the night market. But we try. I mean, she does the cooking especially. I do the sales, Instagram, Facebook, go to buy the products. So each one has its own side. Most of the time, I'm very curious about new types of food. So every time I see something that calls my attention and I want to do it better, I just tell her. I let my wife know, I saw this, I would like it this way, I would like it that way. So she starts cooking it and trying it and give it this and give it like this. So on that way, we did good, we work it out. I mean, sometimes, the argument and stuff, but it's normal. I mean, especially today, so.
It's all part of it. We have one particular business that we talk about at the Tenement Museum that was a German couple in the 1870s, and they ran a restaurant together in the basement of the building that's now the Tenement Museum. And we always talk about, imagine they're always together in their business at home, and how the ups and downs are really part of running a family business. So thanks for sharing a little bit about that. It's good to connect past to present in talking about these family-run immigrant businesses. So now to the cookbook. I see the cookbook behind you, Storm and John, and I'm hoping that you can show us a little bit about it. And Danny, I'll bring you back in a few minutes. I would love, for Storm, could you just tell us a little bit about what we could find in the cookbook?
Sure. First of all, it recreates, there's so many great visuals. I'm proud of the cover because I took the background picture. But most of the rest of the pictures are much more professionally done by John Taggart, who's a New York Times photographer, and he captured scenes of the night markets so beautifully. Check that out.
I can smell it from here, the frying sausages,
wafting through the lights and the lanterns, and it's just, he really captured the whole scene. And he's got portraits, but also sort of anyway, so great photography, also amazing art, illustrations from our art director, Beth Bugler. So this is the inside cover. She's done little drawings of all the foods, and some of the vendors are, we wanted to make the book feel like the experience of visiting the night market. So it's not a stuff, we really didn't want a hard, glossy, stuffy, cocktail table cookbook, that kind that's ooh, we're fancy, everything's pristine and spritzed with whatever and perfectly lit.
I think that's the kind of cookbook that I often read, and then I put it away and never cook from it. That's the kind of cookbook that I never end up cooking from.
Those books totally have value. They're wonderful, aspirational things. That's just not what we want to make. We want to make something that feels just as accessible as the night market itself, affordable, under $20, and full of fun illustrations, and it feels colorful and fun, just like the night market. So if you go through the first few pages, there's this big map that shows you all the places that recipes in this book are from, which is nothing in comparison to all the places where food at the actual night market has come from. Many more places. I think we've only got
42 or 43.
43 places, but it's still pretty good spread. And for each chapter, and it's organized by like continent, kind of, we had a hard time figuring out how to organize the recipes. It goes like Americas and Caribbean, then Europe, and recipes by type, introduction, and then for each vendor, I'll show you, for example, Danny's chapter. We get a lovely
great.
portrait. So that's Danny and his element. And this narrative portion, as you see, is that's what I adapted from our oral history interview, which was like, my gosh, Danny and ours was particularly long. I think it was like 3 hours. Sorry, Danny. I remember it was so like hot, but he had so many amazing stories to share. And then images, and then his 2 recipes come afterwards. Yeah. And so that's pretty much how it is for each vendor. There's like a story aspect, and some of them are illustrated. Yeah, and it's just kind of a fun, approachable thing where you can learn not just stories about the food. I studied quite a few other, cookbooks with biographies, and a lot of them are just about the food. And John made sure, so he was in charge of the food aspect of the curating the recipes in the book and making sure the head notes for the recipes communicate what the food means specifically. And so I let myself kind of diverge from that a little bit in the biographies, so you can, and they're not really biographies, some of them are literally just big quoted excerpts from the oral histories, but they're not necessarily just about the food. Sometimes you want to learn, these are people with many other parts of their lives, and I think that's just as fascinating. People come to the Queen's Night Market as vendors from so many different professional backgrounds, and I find that's one of the most fascinating things. Anyway, so you get to know everybody personally.
Yeah, I mean, and for me, that's one of the most powerful things about the book is the storytelling, and how much you can see your expertise as a historian come through in the way that the stories are communicated. And I mean, it makes the vendors and the whole night market and the food that you're cooking from it that much more meaningful, to hear parts of their story that might not be directly related to them cooking food. So Danny, I mean, how did you decide what to include in the cookbook, and what stories did you want to share in the cookbook?
I decided to include the arepas because that's what we're known for. Two recipes, because on Colombia we have, depending on the region where you live, like I'm from Medellin, which is warmer. Our arepa is mostly just corn, like a tortilla, but we eat it every day for breakfast. Some people eat it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then the arepa that we sell at the night market, which is with cheese, that's from where my wife is from. She's from Bogota, so it's colder. So that's the arepa that they eat over there every day. We eat this arepa in Medellin, but it's mostly like a Sunday thing. Like here, let's make pancakes on a Sunday, so we made the cheese arepa on a Sunday. So that's why I included both for my region and for my wife's region. So
oh my goodness. That is such a perfect detail to know, because you really see then how what's represented in this cookbook, and how your business is a blend of recipes from where you're from and where she's from. And also I would think helps for people who might not be familiar with Colombian food, helps kind of break down like, oh, there's not just one version of Colombian food. There's regional differences. There's perhaps different techniques. So that's really a useful way to communicate something really important to the people reading the cookbook. And Danny, actually, we've just had a question come in from one of the viewers, specifically for you. So people are curious. So throughout New York City and particularly in Queens, we can see a lot of barriers for people connecting across difference, particularly by race. Right, that we might see that people in Queens are not connecting across racial barriers. So the person wants to know, can the ethnic diversity in the Queens night market and in your own restaurant, do you think that diversity can help break down racial barriers in Queens?
Yeah, especially in my restaurant, because it's a Colombian restaurant. I thought that maybe 80% of the people that go to the restaurant is going to be Colombian, but it's a mix. I get Asians, Middle Eastern. It's like Colombian customers will be like 30%. The other 70% is international, which I love. And I think all that came from the night market. Like every Saturday, people go from all the way around the city, and they love the food, so they go to the restaurant or they tell their friends. And I tried to make a menu that was going to be to invite all kind of diversity. Especially where my restaurant is not some part is more like Italians on where I live, but I think everybody so far have liked it. So I got all kind of clientele, Americans. I mean, Americans say people that speak Spanish, Asians, Filipinos. I mean, it's been great. You go to my restaurant and it's not like you're gonna see only Spanish people there. The kind of customers you see on there, so which I love it, and that's what I wanted, because I wanted to have a food that everybody will try, and so far they love it. Thanks to the cheese arepas and John from the night market.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, thank you for answering that so thoughtfully. It's interesting to hear how the audiences are different at the night market booth compared to your restaurant. But I do want to just ask about the growth of the actual restaurant. So you started as a vendor in the Queens Night Market and other places, but what kind of led you to be able to open a physical brick and mortar restaurant?
Okay, market. My goal wasn't even to open a restaurant. I wanted to be the wholesaler, supermarkets, like Whole Food markets, stuff like that. But then an investor started going to the night market, and he tried my food. He liked it. He went like 6 times just to see if I changed the taste, the flavor, the receipt, whatever. And all the time, because to me, at least with the arepas, since I started, even if the price go up and down, I make it the same. I don't change anything. So he liked it, and he came to me and did a proposal. So we worked it out, and I was able to open it. I opened the restaurant without thinking about it. We were working very hard for so many years that finally a big dream came true. Thanks to Hannah, and I guess they flavored our food.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds right. Like people love your food, and that was a huge reason that you were able to be so successful and take this next step of having a market. Storm, I would like to hear more, and I'm sure our viewers would want to hear a little bit more about how your work as an oral historian sort of informed the way that you approached the stories and the cookbook. Like what oral history practices could we learn from looking at the cookbook?
Well, I mean, I'm kind of new to, I've been doing storytelling for my whole life, but oral history as a set of academic practices, best practices, and ethical standards and all that was pretty new to me. I started at Columbia's master's program in 2018, I think, and have loved learning their practices. I don't know. I mean, I feel like the main thing is just the self-consciousness of realizing that how little you know, and kind of helps me that I am obviously an outsider. Like I'm not even a New Yorker, and I'd missed the first 2 years of the night market to my great regret. So I felt like I had a lot of catching up to do. So I always approach the interviews like I know that there's so much that I don't know. Just trying to be open to that. I'm sure I missed tons of stuff, but just that humility and openness and capturing the stories and really trying to make sure So none of these full interviews have been made public yet, and we're taking some time. Well, first of all, I'm just one person. I haven't gotten any grants yet, so I'm like transcribing and stuff takes a long time. I've got 50 interviews. They're on average 2 hours each of life story, and I use 2 video cameras because my background is in filmmaking, so they are filmed. And they will ultimately be archived to the Nunn Center for Oral History at the University of Kentucky, which was possibly the best oral history library in the world. I'm so grateful for that, because they have the ability to put these things online and make them really uniquely accessible. Like you can follow along the video, there'll be a transcript, maybe you can even translate them in the future, just amazing technological access. So I'm really looking forward to that. And the book was kind of a first step in sort of figuring out what stories the vendors actually do want to make public. And I feel like it was a necessary and great, I mean, I'm thrilled that we made the book, but for my greater oral history project, I'm also grateful that we had this opportunity to share parts of the oral histories in this easily digestible form that sort of gives everyone a feeling for, you know, having their personal story out in public, which if you're not used to, can be a little jarring at first. And that's something that oral history as a practice hasn't always done really well in the past. Really like made sure that everybody, you know, understands. I mean, it's just hard to conceptualize like what really happens when your life history goes public. It happened to me when I was 18. I was on some MTV show. I don't want to get into that,
but we won't ask you about that here.
I'm so glad it was before the internet era, because I was like, that was just awful.
Because it's still on VHS, so only in VHS. So.
But you know, it really gave me a sense of like making sure everyone knows, like, are you sure you want to share this with the public? On the other hand, I want you to share your story because it's so important that other people who don't come from a similar background can learn. You learn so much better about other cultures through the personal lens, which the Tenement Museum has done such a great job with. And this is why I'm so excited to be talking with you right now, because you guys are really like the gold standard of oral history education and telling history through a personal lens. And yeah, so the cookbook was just sort of a way to tell, you know, I chose probably, you know, not the scariest anecdotes, but it was a great process just in the editing and like, you know, are you okay with this chapter? Would you all like me to emphasize more this part of our story or another? And we would get feedback and negotiate that. And I look forward to moving on from here and sharing more and seeing the vendors finding other ways to share their stories. And I hope that helps their businesses, and it's awesome.
Yeah. And I certainly see so much connection to the way that the Tenement Museum really looks to oral history, where we have oral history available from people who lived in the neighborhood, who do live in the neighborhood, who lived in our historic buildings, to really just be able to hear from people themselves, how they want their story to be told. And to very simply make the point that everyone's story is important enough to be told, to be included in museums, to be included in a cookbook. So thank you for sharing a little bit about that. And actually, we had a question specifically about the oral histories. Just how many oral histories did you do as part of the Queen's Night Market Oral History Project?
Multiples. 51 chapters, but there's plus the ones that are multiple participants.
I'm confused.
So there's 51 chapters, but they're like the Malaysian project is 3.
Oh, right.
So it doesn't count the like multiple partners in a business.
Somewhere between 50 and 60.
So far. Many hours.
I swear I've got the metadata somewhere. But it's an ongoing project. So this year I'm actually transitioning to, I always wanted to do a second round of interviews to be like, well, first of all, to capture the stories of people I haven't gotten to interview yet because there's so many vendors, but also to follow up and see, you know, how has your business grown or what has happened in your business this year? Because, you know, people get brick and mortars, they go from food truck to other markets. It's I think, really important to capture these stories over time. So I was preparing to do my second round of interviews anyway, and then this whole pandemic thing hit. And I heard about the Queen's Memory Project with the Queen's Public Library and decided to share this year's interviews with the Queens Night Market vendors, whoever wants to participate with them. So I guess we'll be turning their most of the interviews so far, like, you know, your life story in relationship to food and your business. And now I think I'm going to ask people to share their experiences of how this pandemic has hit them and their businesses. And so far, you know, from what I've heard, it's really hard, and it's hard to hear those stories, but it's so important to share them, because there are some people who might otherwise be left out of, you know, policy considerations and just sort of public consciousness. So that's what I'm doing. I've learned how to do remote interviews, and that's where I am now.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, and you know, for bringing us to talk about what we're currently living through, and this crisis, and how it's been impacting so many communities that Queens Night Market is at the nexus of. So you know, we know that, you know, this crisis is more deeply impacting immigrant communities and small businesses and the people of Central Queens. So you know, the night market is really at the center of all of that. So what else have you seen? How are vendors responding and coping through this crisis? You know, I'd be curious to hear a little bit from you, Danny, and from you as well, John.
First.
Go, John.
Me? All right. Sure. So just to lighten the mood very slightly, I forgot to mention that when you asked the motivation for the night market, I should have said 99% Tenement Museum, because they're doing the same thing, right?
You can just
also
set up a branch of the Tenement Museum, a branch of the Tenement Museum there.
It basically is. The subtitle of Night Market is Tenement Museum 2 or something like that. Anyway, so back to the somber question. Yeah, no, the pandemic has been terrible, and you know, I can't say like I run sort of, you know, coordinator of small businesses, so I can't say, you know, obviously I have no business at the moment, so it's hard for me to say, but I think it's much more great and dire for the small businesses that are participating in the night market. And honestly, so we shut down the Queens, or we postponed indefinitely the Queens Night Market in early, I think, or maybe mid-March, and since then, you know, we were basically this, and I was looking for projects and getting antsy and refreshing the news every 30 seconds, like everyone, I think. And then the Queensboro president called me and said, "Hey, I know you're sort of probably in downtime also, or not operating. Do you want to collaborate and try to the healthcare workers?" And I don't know if that's where you were going with this question, but yeah. So the last 4 or 5 weeks, we've partnered with the Queensboro president and also the Queens Economic Development to hire Queens Night Market vendors to feed healthcare workers on the front. The program is officially called Fuel the Front Lines. I think we've collectively raised almost $100,000 over the last 4 weeks, and we've serving close to 8,000 or 9,000 meals so far to healthcare workers in Queens. Danny is participating, I think, coming this Friday, which we're very happy about. A way to sort of keep engaged with the vendors and also provide them, you know, really modest stream of income during these, you know, really trying economic times. I think I missed your entire thing, but that's what I'm doing now.
No, that is really, I think, inspiring to hear how, you know, you have coordinated with the Borough President's Office and the Economic Development Corporation to really mobilize these small businesses in the aid of others. And, you know, I find that, you know, very meaningful to see how, you know, the community of the market can come together in this effort to help frontline workers who are, you know, in this neighborhood that is the most deeply impacted in the country.
And sorry to interrupt, I do want to shout out to all the vendors though, because they're doing it at market prices. They are taking a pretty steep discount to be part of the program, and I'm pretty sure their motivation is not how do I make the, biggest profit margin per meal. They're really like, how do I participate and give back? So, I think we put a sort of informal price cap of $8 per meal, and we have 70 or 80 vendors so far who've stepped up to say, like, let me be part. And I've heard stories, I don't want to name names obviously, but that same meal was being charged $15 to a different charity, and then ours they're selling it for $8. So kudos to the vendors for stepping up and really helping out, not just for the dollar sign. Great.
Yeah. And Danny, it sounds like you're about to be involved in this Fuel the Frontlines initiative, but what have you seen for your business? How has this impacted your restaurant?
I mean, it's been hard. Like for me, I closed for a month because when they decided to close, it's like everything was going very crazy. So a lot of my employees, they take the bus, they take the train, and they were getting worried about it. So we just decided to close. We said, let's close. Let's wait until it starts getting a little better, and then we open again. So finally now, we're gonna open this Thursday. We're gonna open again this Thursday, especially for dinner at 3 o'clock, from 3 to 8, because our morning hours, it was mostly for workers around the area, and most of everything is closed. So we're gonna open Thursday for dinner. And John contacted me about helping the hospitals, the medical staff. So I'm very happy to do it. I'm very happy to do it and start. I mean, it gave me an opportunity to bring some of the employees back, because it's been very hard for them too. So we're gonna try to split it between them, a couple hours, something, at least house for something. And with the chance to help the hospitals, I'm gonna be able maybe to bring more people to work, which is gonna be good for them. And we hope that everything gets better, day by day, it gets better, because it's very tough, because even when we're closed, we still have to pay the bills. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So try to open, if it gets better. I want to hold my employees, and I want to pay the bills too, So it's been hard, but we got a lot of faith that everything is gonna get better soon.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing a little bit about the impact on your business. And we will make sure to include information at the end of this event about how people can donate to the Fuel the Frontlines initiative, and really support the work that you all are mobilizing around in your businesses. So we've received a number of questions from our viewers. So I would love to turn some of these over to you all. First is for John. So it's sort of a two-part question. First, so Taiwan's night markets, they're all over the country of Taiwan. They're really ubiquitous. That's really not the case in the US. So how much interest have you received, or perhaps do you have, in expanding to other cities? And then a related question from another viewer is, do you have any advice for proprietors of similar night market concepts on, doing this in an area that's less diverse, that has not maybe been exposed to as many different cultures?
Sure. The first question, man, terrible. I forgot the first question. The first part of it was about,
first question is, have you received any interest?
Do you
have any interest in expanding to other cities?
Yeah, I was already answering a section in my head. For sure. I think I've been contacted by, I don't know, probably 10 or 15 countries and probably 20 or 30 US states for like, hey, we love what you're doing. We want to, can you come help us? And in a sad note, like Mike is not available, sort of eligible for any of the like small business loans and grants during because I don't have a payroll. It's still me and a bunch of volunteers, including Storm, volunteer pictures.
And that's the case for a lot of vendors.
Oh, for sure.
Also, to keep in mind.
Yeah. But yeah, so something like 10 or 15, maybe even 20 countries from Australia, Russia to London of like, hey, we want to have some of your sauce, which I have very little sauce. I don't even know what that means. So that's been, and then probably like 20 or 30 states, someone from different states have been like, we want to do something. And I've usually told them, like, really the biggest issue is capacity issues. It's still for the most part me, and there are tons and tons of volunteers, which it would take forever to name that have this long. But also me personally, it was just about inspiration of New York City and the Tenement Museum, about how to, the concept doesn't work in a lot of non-New York, non-San Francisco, non-Houston cities, right? Because if you're looking to be the most diverse community event in hopefully New York, but even maybe in the US, it works in very few cities. And so usually I'm just like, I'm not an expert. I have experience in event planning except for this one. So, I'm happy to give you some sort of, advice that I can think of on the top of my head, but I'm no expert. In terms of the second question was, what advice do I give? I think that was what it was. None. Don't do it. No, I definitely, or I don't want to say, I definitely talked to a lot of people doing something similar. So for instance, when the night market started, Queens Night Market started, there were only 2 or 3 so-called night markets in North America. The 2 biggest ones were in Vancouver, like almost right across the street from each other. And there was like once a year in Philadelphia, and then there was the LA night market, which was a few times a year maybe, and that was it. So it was a lot of education process and telling people what it is. There are definitely, there are so many sort of so-called night markets over the last 4 years, and I don't want to take undue credit for any of them, but for sure a lot of them have contacted me and said, will you help? And I do what I can. And I don't know. I think it's about this. Hopefully our claim to fame is how diverse we are. I think a lot of it is just like, can you be meticulous of your mission and making sure that it reflects in all sorts of, every aspect of your business or your event, right? So even when times are super tough, we could have charged $1 which if you're getting 10 to 20,000 people a night would have really changed the business model. You let go of the price cap. The things that Danny's selling for $5 at the Queens Night Market could be $10 to $15 at other unnamed, food events, right? And they could, instead of making $1 per dish, he'd be $9 or $14 a dish. So if I had let go of that price cap, I charged Danny $1,000 a night to be at the night market, So but all those sort of costs chip away at the essence of the night market and the whole idea of affordability, accessibility, and so I almost slip. The sort of generic advice I give is just sort of like figure out what you care about and make sure that that informs every decision you make. And for better or worse, that's where we are.
Yeah. And again, I mean, that sort of values-based decision making of what's important to you as the sort of curator and generator of this, that really comes through. And I can tell it's coming up on dinner time because we have a lot of comments about how much people are looking forward to eating an arepa and cooking from the cookbook. What is each of your favorite recipes from the cookbook?
Well, I'll start really quick and not about recipes, but if you're a Narcos fan, there's like a small allusion to Narcos in Danny's chapter. So I think we just increased our bills by 2 million or 3 million by mentioning Narcos. Right? Danny, you know what I'm talking about. Anyways, I am not going to play favorites. I'm going to pass that on to everyone else.
What?
Straight to Storm.
I'm allowed to play favorites?
Yes, you are.
That's terrible. I can't. It's unethical.
She's gluten-free, so that Nick's
okay, let's say, what is one of your recipes that you're looking forward to cooking?
Well, I can say what we've made so far out here. I can tell you, being quarantined with this book, I think Fortune magazine called us our cookbook like one of the
best 6 cookbooks to try
cookbooks to just like self-quarantine with. And I have to say it is true. Like, I'm so we got our advanced copy because we've been playing with this, and so far we made
we ran through the Filipino section.
Yeah, we did 2 Filipino vendors. We did leche flan from Kanin NYC and
Chicken
adobo from Manila, right?
Yep.
And
No, Lapu Lapu.
Oh, Lapu.
Whoopsies. Yeah.
Um,
But we plan to make Danny's every night, so the quarantine.
and we made Norwegian lamb stew, which
Yeah,
is pretty
lamb, yeah.
amazing. Yeah, and I really want to make that tea leaf salad, but we don't quite have all the ingredients. It's okay, we'll improvise a little bit. Like I'm apology de Rangoon Burmese vendor, but I'm planning on trying to make pickled
Tea leaves
fermented tea leaves out of yerba mate, which is the only loose leaf green tea find.
That's
but,
good. So it's helpful to people to hear, because when they buy the cookbook, you need to think about these adaptations because you might not be able to find everything right now. Danny, do you have a favorite recipe in the cookbook?
That's not yours. That's not his.
That's not yours.
Wait, I haven't seen the cookbook.
I've seen the pictures and.
Are you seeing it?
Oh yeah, he was at the.
Yeah, you'll show it to me the last. I think it was the last night.
No, it was at that Economic Development Corporation meeting.
Oh, nice.
Part of it, but I haven't been. I'm waiting for the book to look at it and start trying out.
So wait, what's your favorite thing to eat at the night market? That's not yours.
I like the burgers from the
Malaysian Project.
Yeah, I love those burgers. I think they're the best. And the story with them, I started doing a night market on the city by 163, and I met them there. And
the Bendy Plaza.
Yeah, and I told them, listen, you should go to the night market. Your burgers are delicious. You should try. And they were scared. No. We had to pay. We don't have that. No, you have to try. They're gonna go it. You're gonna do very good. Finally, they listened to me. They applied to the night market, and now I think like the #1 or the second best over there. They went from having 2 guys like to 6 or 7.
Thanks to you.
I mean, it's a friendship.
No, it's awesome. So with any stories like this, I love hearing how vendors recommend the Queens Night Market and the other markets.
And even Saturdays that I can go to the night market and I had to stay at the restaurant. I tell my son or my daughter to bring me a burger from dinner.
That's how you get the burgers, is get the vendor to come to you, right? So we have time for one more question before we close out. And people are curious who tested the recipes before the book went to print.
Yep.
My mother. we sent some out to a bunch of friends.
It was
family.
A collective effort. Storm and I tried a bunch. The vendors, their families tried a bunch. Everyone's friends and family tried a bunch. So it's completely collaborative effort as the cookbook is. It was, we can't say that we made all 88 recipes, but someone did. Someone was forced to make them. So.
That's great. And, that's the perfect, example of how the market is really a big community of people who help each other and cook each other's food and now are in a book together. So thank you both so much for joining us. Thank you all for being part of this event. And it was really a pleasure to hear about the stories of the market and the community that you've built out of it, and the cookbook. So a few notes for all of our viewers. To order the World Eats Here cookbook, please go to bookreview.com to order from Book Review. It's the largest independent bookseller in Long Island, and we've partnered with them on the sales for the book. So you can pre-order. The book will be officially available for sale on May 12th. So I know I'm looking forward to receiving my copy after that and good and cooking from it. And to donate to Fuel the Frontlines Queens initiative that you're involved in, you can visit queensny.org. So stay tuned for future Tenement Museum virtual events. You can sign up for our newsletter at tenement.org. We hope you all will join us again, and take care, Storm and John and Danny. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
so much. Have
All
a
right,
great
thank you.
night.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Take care and good night.
Good night.
Bye, good night.